Cheers.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers, homie.
Great. Got our nice German beer. So in our last episode, someone was asking us what the beer we were drinking was. So this is Paulaner. Careful not to hit the mic. This is Paulaner. And then what are you drinking, Dad?
I am drinking Weißbier.
Oh, you say it in such a German way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, even though you haven't lived there for a while. I mean, you go there. When was the last time you went to Germany anyways?
I was there in October.
Okay, so that's pretty recent. But today, I'm back here for Christmas, but we're not going to talk about Christmas stuff.
No.
We're going to be talking about tipping culture in the United States and when you should tip, what you should tip, and why. So, because a lot of people, in Japan, what's the purpose of tipping in the States? Why would you give tips to someone?
Well, there are really two reasons that you give tips in the U.S. One is to reward service which meets or exceeds your expectations.
Yeah.
To show your pleasure or displeasure with the server. Mm-hmm. The other is that in the United States, people that work as servers get paid an hourly wage, which is below the minimum hourly wage.
You can talk to me about this. We're having a conversation. You're not talking. They're listening, but you're not talking to them. You're talking to me, and they're listening to our conversation. I mean, if you guys want my dad to talk to you, please let me know in the comments. That's fine too. Yeah. So
okay. Well. All right. So. People that work as servers have an hourly wage which is below the minimum hourly wage.
How much is that now? It's like $2.50?
I don't know, something. I really don't know. I would guess it's probably around $3 or $4.
Okay.
But
per hour.
Right, per hour. It's below the minimum hourly wage because the Labor Department, which regulates these things, assumes that people will make up the difference and more with tips.
Okay.
And in fact, most servers prefer to work in this sort of arrangement because in the end they usually make a lot more money with tips than they would if they had a minimum wage. Yeah,
it's like minimum wage. I mean, I saw now like Massachusetts minimum wage as of like 2023 is about $15 an hour now.
I didn't realize it was that high.
I saw it
getting there.
I saw it like in your office. You have like a Massachusetts State Employment Index, like where people can call if they're getting harassed or something. But they say Massachusetts minimum wage is $15.
So now you're going to embarrass me because I should know that if I post.
Are you going to lose your job? Office. John, don't watch this video.
But that could be true. I know in California it's $15.
In Seattle it's $15. When I was a college student, it was already $12. So like when I worked, and in Seattle too, like when you're wait staff, well actually maybe not, but yeah, it was $12 already. But yeah, so like you said, like minimum wage is $15, $12, whatever, and when you get tips, you earn a lot more, like $20 or $30 an hour. That's pretty lucrative for some people. Yeah. I mean, so like I remember when I worked at a restaurant in Seattle, I was a busboy, so I didn't get. I wasn't a server, but I worked with servers, and I would get some of their tips.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty common.
Yeah, but my tips, so like traditionally though, tips were like kind of under the table, which means like they were just given out as cash. They weren't part of your official wages, but now in a lot of places, they put it as part of your pay stub, so it's like kind of this income.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever work a tip job?
Never.
Never?
Never.
You're above that. Okay, so that's kind of it. So let's talk about the details. So some people, now people are coming back to the United States, and they're coming back to the United States, and they go to a restaurant. How much should they tip? What's traditional?
Yeah, usually in the United States you would tip 20%. If you tip less than 20%, it would be a display of displeasure with the server. But it's not unusual for people to tip more, up to 25%. If they really thought the service was excellent. Right. And then, of course, at certain times of year, such as the holiday season we're in now, it's not unusual for people to tip extra large. I should also add that during the pandemic, people were giving extra large tips because it was considered at the time that servers were performing a more dangerous than usual job. And the public was grateful that people even wanted to work as servers.
Okay, well that's good to know. So if you go to a restaurant, basically 15%, there would never be a situation where you tip 0, right?
Well, there would if you wanted to, if you were upset with the server.
Yeah.
For example, if you thought the server did a very poor job and was inattentive.
Yeah.
But you probably would get some nasty remarks made to you if you left 0 tip.
Yeah, I remember one time I was in college, and it was a group of friends, and we mismatched the tip. Like, I guess someone was supposed to calculate the tip, and they didn't, and we all just paid, and we left with like 5% tip or something like that.
Okay.
And as we were leaving, the server stopped us, like, "Hey, you can't just do that. Like, where's the tip?" You know, they stopped us, and like they didn't like bar the door from us or anything, but that was when I was like, man, tips are like really serious business.
Yeah, well, in fact, you can though do that if you want.
Yeah,
it's not like you're violating the law.
Yeah.
Also, I don't. It's been a long time since I've taken a taxi, but it used to be when in the day of using cash to make payment, you would give the taxi driver a tip in cash, and they would expect a few dollars or something approximating 20% of the fare. And one time, I just didn't have enough cash, so I gave a very, very small tip, and the driver threw the money back at me.
When was this?
That was in New York City. That was probably in the early 80s.
Okay, in the early 80s, okay. Right, so restaurants are pretty straightforward, and also like in a lot of places, if you're a large party, they'll put like gratuity, which is tip, automatically on like 18% or something like that.
Right. And
you can put above that if you want. But that's okay. So that's restaurant, pretty standard, 20%. Now, outside of that, like going to hotels, taking taxis. Like I remember one time I saw we were taking the airport shuttle. So like we were taking the bus or something between airport terminals, and you gave like a $5 bill to the driver one time. Right. You know, and I didn't see anyone else do that. So like what's kind of the rule for tipping if you want to be a kind person?
Right. Yeah. Well, if you want to be a kind person, you would tip the driver of a van. You would tip the driver.
So let's think about specific situations. Yeah. So like when you're doing this, when would you tip?
Well, for example, let's say you arrive at a hotel and you have some bags, and in some cases they pretty much tell you you have to leave your bags, by the concierge, and then someone will bring your bags up to your room. So you don't bring your bags yourself. So you get up to your room, and then a porter will arrive with your bags. It used to be that you would tip $1 per bag.
Okay.
But I think now, and depending on the quality of the hotel, if it's an expensive hotel, you probably would give the porter a few more dollars. Or for a luxury hotel, you'd probably give them $5 a bag. Okay. But that is really at your discretion. Yeah. Then in cases where, let's say you're taking an airport shuttle, so not for a regular bus, like in a public transportation bus, but if you took a shuttle bus, say provided by your hotel, which takes you to the airport, some sort of a service provided by somebody else where you're not charged for the bus, it would be, I wouldn't say it's expected by the driver that you would tip the driver, but it would be kind.
Surprising.
It would be the kind thing to do. And in that case, depending on how long the trip was, I would give the driver a few dollars, maybe $5 or slightly more. I mean, we often take a shuttle from Charlotte Airport to our address in Columbia, South Carolina, where we have a house. And so that's an hour-and-a-half trip. And I will usually tip that driver, even though I pay for the fare. But I would also tip the driver $5 or maybe even $10 if I was really happy.
$5, $10. But you wouldn't do that on like public transportation. Would you do that? Like, let's say you take like a Greyhound bus, a long distance bus from Boston to New York. Would you tip the driver?
No.
So you would only like tip. So like what's kind of like the deciding factor between that? Because you're both getting delivered somewhere. Like what?
I would say. In the time that you would tip, would be either that the service was being provided by, your hotel or some other company, and you weren't paying anything, or if it were a service that you were paying out of pocket, but not a service provided by the state or the government. So the difference would be if you booked a shuttle and you were taking a shuttle from one airport to another that you paid for, you would normally give a tip, or it would be nice to give a tip. Yeah. But if you were taking public transportation provided for by the state and you paid the fare, normally you would not. I mean, it would be actually odd to see someone tipping the driver for that.
Okay. And what else in the hotel? Do you also tip the cleaners that come by in the hotel rooms?
Well, if you stay, many hotels will leave an envelope on the on the dresser, and they'll say that this would be for the tip for the cleaners, the cleaning service. I would say, I mean, if I'm only staying one night, I wouldn't normally leave a tip.
Yeah.
Some people would, but if you were staying a week, then you would, because in that case, in that scenario, the cleaners are coming in every day to clean your room, make your bed, and take care of it. So they're doing you a service, and you would reward extra good service with a tip. But if you're only staying one night, they're basically not taking care of you. They're just preparing the room for the next client.
Yeah. So would you say that like tipping kind of goes down to if someone's giving you a personal or at least like a private service, you'd give them a tip? Because like on a Greyhound bus where people pay for their fare to just go on, you wouldn't tip it because it's like it's for everyone. But like a taxi is more like a personal thing, right?
Right.
Does that make sense?
I would say that's a good way to look at it. Yes.
Okay. So also with Uber Eats and stuff like that, because they have Uber Eats in Japan too, but in Uber Eats here, you're like, if you don't pay a tip, no one's ever gonna get your food.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they're like, there's so many videos of people saying, our wages are our tips. If you don't give us tips, we're working for free. We're not gonna do it. So then like, it's like that.
Okay.
So I want to, so you've also spent a lot of time in Europe though, in Germany. So what's like tipping culture like in Europe or in Germany?
Right. Yeah, it's quite a bit different. For one thing, certainly in Germany, I believe that the servers earn the minimum wage.
Yeah.
So they're not paid an artificially low salary. And interestingly, service is included on the bill. Yeah. So it will say this amount of money includes, tax and service of 12%.
Yeah.
However, the servers typically will tell you that they don't get any of that money that's included in service. I don't know if that's really true. It could be that the owners of the establishment factor that into the fact that they're paying them at least the minimum wage. I don't know. However, it's become normal to add a tip on top. Okay. But in this case, you would add up to, say, 10%.
Okay.
Usually not more than that. It used to be many years ago when I first went to Germany, when you were paying primarily with cash, you would round up the amount you gave to the server to the next sort of even number, but it wouldn't be even.
When you say even number, what does that mean?
10%. So let's say your what you paid for came to €8 or 8 Deutschmarks 50. Yeah. You might just give them 10.
Yeah.
Or some people just give them 9. Yeah. And then if you wanted to show that you were not happy with the server, you would insist that they gave you your exact change. So like if your beer and your sausage came to 8 Deutschmarks 35, you would insist that they gave you 170, 165 back. Of course, then you get a dirty look and all that. But
it's more like just keep the change kind of culture, right? But now it's a little bit different.
Kind of. But the interesting thing is you don't say keep the change, which can be confusing, say, for Germans who would come here if they don't travel outside of Germany very much, because when you pay your German server, you tell them.
You're talking to me.
Okay, but I just want to see you on there.
I know.
You will tell them what amount they should round it up to. So, for example, the server says comes to $15.50. Yeah. You would say, okay, make it 17.
Yeah.
You wouldn't say keep the change. You would say you would have to tell them what amount.
Okay.
Which would be very odd for someone to do in the U.S.
Yeah.
Because the server here wouldn't know what you were talking about.
Right.
If you said, make it 17.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah. But you said it's kind of changed now. Now it's like 10% or something like that, up to 10%.
I would say usually people are tipping 5 to 10%.
Okay. But not like 20% that you would do here. Okay.
I have seen that, but normally not.
Okay. So I kind of want to know, because I also want to talk about how tipping culture has changed, especially post-pandemic, because a lot of things have been changing, I think. But how do you feel about this whole tipping? So like pre-pandemic, How do you feel about that kind of tipping culture in America where it's expected you'll pay 15%, 20%?
Well, I think what happened during the pandemic.
No, before the pandemic.
Before the pandemic, it was 15 to 20%.
Yeah. So what I want to know is, how did you feel about that system before pandemic? Because it's changed since then. I'm sure your feelings.
I just accepted it. I thought, well, that's normal.
Okay.
I thought 15 to 20% was just the way society does it.
Yeah.
So I just accepted that.
But then when you went to Germany, it was kind of different, right?
Then it was different because then you wouldn't tip nearly as much.
So coming back here, did that like change how you felt, or were you just like, oh, it's just two separate systems?
No, I just code changed.
Okay.
Or code switched.
Code switched. Yeah, code switched. Yeah. Okay. Well, then, so for you, it was like, oh, well, if I go to Germany, I don't have to pay so much, but whatever, just different cultures, different rules.
Exactly.
And Japan's the best because there's no tipping. So okay, and then since the pandemic, have you felt like changes in tipping culture have happened here?
I think there have been changes. What's happened is, so during the pandemic, the amount that people tipped went up quite a bit, and people, because there were opportunities to actually go out somewhere where you could be served. Restaurants. Most restaurants were closed for a period of time, and bars, you couldn't even go to a bar unless it also served food, and you had to order food in order to be served a drink. So people were grateful that there were servers that were willing to expose themselves to the virus and wait on customers in a bar. So people were tipping more. People were tipping 20, 25, maybe 30%, and they felt like, oh, well, this is to be kind to these servers who are risking their lives to serve us, that sort of narrative. But then, and then since the pandemic's been over, I feel like people have been reeling that back in. However, the expectations in the marketplace seem to be trying to resist the reduction in tipping that's happening. So, for example, what never used to happen before the pandemic, at least I don't recall, was that when you would pay at a register, say in a coffee shop, that they would ask you how much of a tip you wanted to add. Because normally in the U.S., prior to the pandemic, it would be unusual to tip someone that didn't actually serve you at a table or come to you. If you're just purchasing something at a counter, you would think, well, I'm not really getting any special service here, so why should I tip? Yeah, or you just drop your change in the tip jar or something like that. It wasn't like anything serious. Right, and even not so much that. But now they're asking you to tip at the register. They're asking you if you want to donate to a charity. That comes up when you're trying to pay. I mean, this is also influenced by the fact that everybody's paying with a card now, or Venmo or some other service of payment. But interestingly, not all people working at the register or at coffee shops are comfortable with this. Some people working the register or a barista at a coffee shop who you would pay, they feel uncomfortable asking for tips. And I've actually been to coffee shops locally where they would say, no, don't tip, please. Say no, don't do it. So I remember one time, so there's a coffee shop near where we live now where it has one of those things, and it's always like, do you want a tip? And if it was, so when I was in Seattle, I'd always give like my change or something, maybe $1, like my change or $1 or something, just because why not? Be nice. But then, so they had the screen come saying, do you want a tip? And it was 15, 20, or 24% at that point. And I would like tip, okay, let's do 15%, whatever, 10%, whatever. They never do less than 15%. But I remember one time I wanted to buy a bag of coffee from there. And I can understand, like, if they're making you a drink or something, like, I mean, at least there's some skill going into that. But, like, buying a bag of coffee is just, like, take it off the shelf and give it to you. Like, that's part of the job, right? So at that time when I did that, I didn't want to give a tip. So I pushed the no tip button, but it didn't react. And I kind of pushed it in, like, 3 different ways. And I was staying there for like 10 seconds trying to push this button, and it wasn't working. So I no tip is not an option.
So I just did 15% and then just cut it out. And I'm not going to buy coffee beans from there again, you know? But it's just like, it's like, what's going on? I've even heard that, like, at cash register, not at supermarket cash registers, they're asking if you want to give a tip or something, you know? So, like, a lot of places are asking for tips. Even McDonald's is asking for tips sometimes, whatever. Yeah, it's like this whole thing like, hey, please give us more. Please give us more.
Well, and I wonder to what degree those tips even go to the people working there.
Yeah, and also like I said with DoorDash, right? So like, or the delivery companies, right? Mm-hmm. So like, most of the service fee and the cost or whatever doesn't go to the drivers. So so you have to give them a tip, otherwise they're going to get $0. And why would they drive you your food for $0? And like on the internet, I can see people leave comments like, hey, if you're gonna splurge on a service like that, then you should be willing to give a tip and not be a cheapskate or something like that. And I've even seen like there was this case in the States of like, was it Auntie Anne's, the pretzel company? You know, the pretzel. Mm-hmm. So like apparently this woman didn't give a tip because it's Auntie Anne's, and the people wouldn't give her food unless she gave a tip or something like that. So like you see a lot of like people now, they're demanding tips and they're like, I refuse, even though you paid the money for the service, I'm not going to give it to you until you give me a tip, like kind of blackmailing now.
Well, I would just not use them again.
Yeah, right. I know.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah. So how do you feel about the tipping culture now in the States?
Well, I feel that in general it's gone back pretty much to normal.
Yeah.
If you're leaving a tip at a restaurant or in a bar.
Yeah.
But you still have these, you still have being pressed to give extra tips or make donations at the register of coffee shops or even in retail outlets. I mean, retail outlets are not necessarily asking for a tip, but they're asking if you want to round up the amount to give to a certain charity or make a donation to a certain charity that the store is sponsoring. I find that improper.
Yeah. Why is that?
Well, I find it improper if I'm being. I mean, I have an easy time resisting that sort of pressure, but not everybody does. Yeah. Because people are watching you, and it makes you feel like you're a cheapskate if you say no. Yeah. And if no one was watching, the people would probably say no. But because the person at the register is watching, and maybe the person standing behind them in line is watching, they feel like, oh, I don't want to.
I felt that pressure before.
Right, and I think that's unfair.
Yeah.
Because if people want to give to charity, that's good. But I think it's the responsible thing to do. For example, if you want to give to charity, is to investigate the charity and find out if it's making good use of the money. Yeah. And not just donate to a charity that's kind of pushed on you by some store that you happen to buy something at.
And also, it becomes a tax write-off for the store. But if you were to give the money yourself, it would be a tax write-off for you.
That's interesting. That's a good point.
Yeah. So okay, so bringing it back to like for Japanese people who want to know about tipping culture because they're planning on going to the United States, they want to leave a good impression. They don't want to make any sort of issues or problems. Right. So is there kind of like a rule of thumb that you give for tipping culture in the States? Like restaurants, we know is like 20%.
Right. I would say yes, 20% at a restaurant. Don't if you're really unhappy with the service, you can give less. But on the other hand, it's probably not a significant amount of money. So just give 20% as a general rule. If you're checking in a hotel and there's someone carrying your bags, I would give the person $2 to $3 per bag. And otherwise, I would always refuse to give a tip at the point of sale at a Starbucks or some place where you're collecting your food items at the counter, and I would always refuse to make the donation where they're asking you to do that at a retail outlet, and don't feel embarrassed by it. Just do it.
But what about in other situations where they're like I said, there are other opportunities, like if they're staying at a hotel for multiple days, or if they're using like a what do you call it, livery service? Like a
delivery service?
No, not delivery service.
Like a car,
like a car, or a taxi, or something like that. Like, what's kind of like, how much should they give, or like?
I would say a livery service, I would give between 10 and 20%, depending on the, how large the bill is.
Yeah. So basically, if you're asking for a private service or at least a semi-private service, and you want to share your thanks, it would be like 10 to 20%. Restaurants 20%. You don't have to do that for buses or public transportation or anything that's kind of like expected. Right. So like even with like at Starbucks or a coffee shop, because they're not really serving you personally, they're not coming over to your table and giving you the coffee. You're going to pick it up. It's like
correct
fast food, so you don't need to do that. But if you have someone coming to you, talking to you, getting your order, then you would pay the tip.
Yes.
Right.
Correct.
Okay. You feel like I'm missing anything?
No. Well, just if you're someone a porter in a hotel carrying your bags, give them a couple bucks per bag.
Yeah.
Unless it's a very expensive hotel, then maybe you want to give them $5 a bag.
Yeah. Basically, if someone gives you a private service, someone's going out of their way to take care of you, then you give them a tip.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. If you guys have any other questions about tipping, please let me know in the comments. I'm sure we can answer them later. And thanks for joining me today.
All right.
We'll do
Thanks for having me.
This is not a cheers. This is like an uncheers. We're ending the conversation. So there you go. Great.